So you might have noticed in a few of my films over the past few months that I've been wearing two watches and wondered why. Well, I've been testing out the Coros Vertix and comparing it against my trusty Suunto 9 Barrow, and I'm here today to tell you what I've found. Now, this is not going to be an exhaustive review of every single feature of the watch because it's been on the market for over 2 years, so there's no shortage of videos that cover those in detail. Like most premium GPS watches on the market these days, the Vertix is packed with features, but none of those matter in my opinion if the watch can't perform in two key areas, which are battery life and GPS accuracy. For me, if a watch can't reproduce an accurate representation of my track and last long enough to do so, then it's of little use. So that will be my primary focus in this video. Now I'm going to divide this video into 3 sections in case you want to jump ahead. First, I will give an overview of the key features that I've found to be most useful. Second, I'm going to do a detailed analysis of the GPS accuracy, comparing recordings to those done on my Suunto 9 Barrow on a dozen runs ranging from 20 to 100 kilometers. And lastly, I'll give you my final thoughts, including a few areas where I could see room for improvement on the watch in future iterations. So let me start by telling you a little bit about this watch as well as the company behind it. Coros first entered the GPS watch market with the Pace Multisport GPS watch in May of 2018, followed by the Apex Premium later that year. The model that I've been testing out is the Vertix, which was launched in May of 2019. This GPS adventure watch immediately began making waves in the industry thanks to its incredible battery life, and I think it was positioned to be a direct competitor to the Suunto 9 Barrow. There's a handy chart on Coros' website comparing all of the specs and features of their entire lineup, but if you're looking for a multi-sport watch that can keep up with the longest and the most demanding mountain and trail running activities, then trust me, this is the one. But like the Suunto 9 Barrow and other watches in its class, this is not a cheap watch. It is a serious investment. Note that this blue version, which they call Icebreaker, is a little more expensive than the other colors by I think $100 because the fiber case is translucent and I'm told also hand assembled. But all Vertix models are equipped with a titanium bezel and sapphire glass, so the build quality is otherwise the exact same. Like the Suunto 9 Barrow, it has a touchscreen, which by the way you can disable, which I've done. It similarly has Bluetooth connectivity, a wrist-based heart rate monitor, a compass, an accelerometer, a barometer to help provide more accurate altitude readings as well as temperature, and a cadence sensor. Both watches provide various reports on things like activity, calories burned, pace, steps, sleep, and so on. And of course, it's got an app for setting up and syncing your watch, just like the Suunto app, which can automatically sync to a number of third-party services like Strava. But it's got some additional features that I love that the Suunto 9 Barrow doesn't. This includes blood oxygenation levels. Now, I haven't played too much yet with this feature on this watch, but measuring blood oxygen saturation is something that I've done in the past when trekking at high altitude. So I could see this definitely coming in handy the next time I'm training or racing somewhere like Colorado. This feature has been added in the brand new Suunto 9 Peak, but isn't available on my Suunto 9 Barrow. It's got an auto lock feature. On the Suunto 9 Barrow, you need to hold down the lock button for 3 seconds to lock it, whereas on the Vertix, you can have it lock automatically to make sure you don't accidentally pause your recording. To unlock it, use the dial. And speaking of which, I love this dial. It's got a really nice tactile response, even with gloves on. The strap has a bit more flexibility in it as well. It's also a little smaller and a little lighter than the Suunto 9 Barrow. I think that women in particular, but really anyone with smaller wrists, will prefer the feel of the Vertix. It's got Ant Plus technology to support older accessories, which was recently removed from the Suunto series. And I've got an old bike cadence sensor that's Ant Plus that I could see using again now that I have a compatible watch. You can update the firmware straight from the app, again something that has been added to the Suunto 9 Peak, but isn't available in my Suunto 9 Barrow, which still requires using the Suunto Link app on my desktop computer. And it's got a cool feature which allows you to stop and then resume later an activity without having to leave it paused like you would on the Suunto 9 Barrow. And this could be really useful for multi-day events where you want a single track instead of a separate recording for each day, or even just for shorter runs where you haven't quite decided if you're going to just stop for a break or if you're stopping completely. But the main difference between these two watches is definitely in battery life. The Suunto Barrow 9 has a pretty decent battery life of up to 25 hours at full GPS, but it's really easy to extend this while still maintaining the highest level of GPS accuracy. I use a custom battery mode for my longer events with the watch set to low color mode, the display timeout enabled, and both the heart rate sensor and touch display disabled, which gets me about 42 hours, which is more than enough for a 100 miler. For a 200 miler or a multi-day event, I then just need to charge the watch a couple of times with the battery bank. And this has allowed me to record some pretty incredible looking tracks, including Tour des Géants and the Swiss Peaks 360K. The Vertix, on the other hand, boasts a pretty incredible 60 hours of battery life in full GPS mode. And again, I think you can extend this a little further by turning off features like the heart rate monitor. And while I haven't had to use this watch continuously for anywhere near 60 hours yet, it does take the pressure off a little bit of always having to remember to charge your watch in between uses. And I'm sure that the average runner could probably get a good couple of weeks of regular use in between charges. Now let's look at GPS accuracy by comparing the recordings from the two watches. Now first off, my methodology. For each of these runs, I wore my Suunto 9 Barrow on my left hand, as I always have, and the Coros Vertix on my right to avoid any interference between the two watches. I set the Coros to right-handed wrist-hand mode and turned off the heart rate since I wanted to focus on GPS for these tests, but I left all the other settings pretty much at default. I kept both watches up to date at all times with the latest firmware, and I always synced both watches with their respective apps before leaving for my run to ensure that I had the most recent satellite data. Both watches were always fully charged and both on the default best GPS accuracy setting using the trail running sport mode. After each run, I exported the data from the app as GPX files and imported them into Gaia for comparison. The Coros Vertix track is in red and the Suunto 9 Barrow in blue. All of these runs were done in pretty challenging conditions from a satellite coverage standpoint, including tree cover, river valleys and canyons, steep slopes, and alpine terrain. There's very little road running here, so it's safe to say that I really put both of these watches through their paces. Overall, there is very little difference between the two tracks, with both watches performing really well. But there were a couple of cases on longer runs where I did temporarily lose GPS on the Coros. This is a chart showing the distance recorded by each watch on these 12 runs. In almost all cases, the Coros reported around 5% less distance than the Suunto, and the two cases where it did report significantly higher distance were where it had lost GPS signal. The difference in elevation was a little less consistent, although in most cases the value from the Suunto seemed to match more closely with the watches of the other runners I was with, as well as my expectations for a given route. Now, one thing to note here is that I did leave the Coros Vertix on its default of what's called 3D distance mode, which uses elevation gain to calibrate the distance compared to 2D distance. I originally assumed that this would provide better accuracy, but the documentation does say that it's ideal for cases when both speed and elevation gain are high, like with skiing. So it's possible that this led to some of the variation in GPS recordings, but it shouldn't have contributed to the GPS signal loss that I saw in a couple cases. It'd be unfortunate if it did, because I think the majority of users are likely to just leave this turned on and not question it like I originally did. Now let's talk about some of the areas where I see room for improvement. Now, first up is the GPS accuracy. Now, I'd have to say that it's pretty good in most cases, but not great in terms of consistency, as you've seen from my results. My Suunto 9 Baro has just been so reliable for me over the past few years that I'm just not sure that I'm ready to make the switch, especially for races where an accurate track is so important to me, despite the huge improvement in battery life. Now, I should point out here that not everyone I know has had such a good experience with their own Suunto 9 Baro, while others have had much better results from the Coros Vertix. So you may want to take my results so far with a grain of salt. Next, while you can import GPX files and create routes from previous runs you've recorded using the Coros, there's no route planner in the app itself, unlike the Suunto app. And this to me is the biggest limitation of what is otherwise a really great app. I find it actually syncs much faster than the Suunto 9 Baro, and it prompts you to sync if you haven't in over a week to ensure that you have up-to-date satellite data. But as I talked about in my video about the apps that I use for navigation and route planning a while back, I've really begun to rely on the Suunto app to design routes on the fly, so I'd love to see some further development here. The options for interval training are quite limited as well. I use this feature a fair bit when doing hill repeats on my Suunto 9 Baro, and I can only seem to access it when using the basic run mode, but not in trail running mode on the Coros Vertix. I did find the interface a little overwhelming and difficult to use at first. In my experience with Suunto watches over the years, which themselves used to be much more complex, many people aren't really willing to spend the time to dive in and customize features, and they tend to just use the same couple of options all the time. So I think it's important to make things as simple and intuitive as possible for the average user, both on the watch and the app. But I'm confident that this is an area that they'll keep iterating on. Now, I'd love to see topo maps built right into the watch, like on the Garmin Fenix. And this was a feature that was introduced in the Suunto 7 last year, but the drawback of that watch is, of course, its abysmal battery life of something like 12 hours. And given the incredible battery life on the Coros Vertix, if they were to incorporate topo maps, I think this would be a game changer that would really separate it from the competition. And lastly, and this is a very small thing, no pun intended, this little cap that covers the charging port is tiny and really easy to lose track of. Assuming that it is important and meant to keep out debris, then maybe a little flap to attach it to the back of the watch would keep you from losing it so easily. But overall, this is a really impressive watch, and I have to assume that both Garmin and Suunto are watching Coros pretty closely. And it'll be interesting to see what comes next. I'd love to hear about your own experience with either of these watches in the comments below. And as always, if you found this video helpful, give it a like and be sure to subscribe for more videos like this.